Before we begin the show, I want to tell you about a couple of events coming up. The first is an Ask Me Anything live webinar. That'll be Wednesday, October 4th at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. If you buy your tickets for the live webinar before this Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, you'll get the special early sale price of only $5. And the second is a weekend event with me in Los Angeles at the Reason TV Studios, and that'll be November 10th through the 12th. You can find out about the AMA webinar at thaddeusrussell.com/AMA. And for information about the Los Angeles weekend, you can go to thaddeusrussell.com/Los Angeles. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. To make this show what it is, I have to talk to people in person, face to face, not on Skype or on the phone. That means I have to travel around the country and find recording spaces wherever I go. That's expensive. And so far, this show is entirely supported by the contributions of listeners. So if you want to keep it going, please do me a favor and go to unregisteredunderground.com. When you become a subscriber there, you'll have access to a private Facebook group where you can talk with me and with guests from the show. You'll also get discounts on Unregistered and Renegade University merchandise. So again, to support this show and to keep it going, please go to unregisteredunderground.com. I'm very happy to announce our first sponsor. Today's show is brought to you by Mack Weldon. For 20% off your order, visit mackweldon.com and use promo code UTR. That's mackweldon.com, promo code UTR. He is the most popular guest so far on Unregistered. He's one of my favorite public intellectuals, and he's certainly one of my favorite people. So when I was in New York recently, I just had to interview Kmele Foster. By popular demand, he's back. Kmele Foster.
That. Hi, Thad.
Everybody wants you.
This is true.
Everybody's been asking,
yeah,
demanding. I'm not kidding. In fact, you know what? Just yesterday, I was talking to someone from Topeka, Kansas, of all places.
Yeah.
And, you know, they were your typical libertarian who you would expect to like you. And they said that they had all these liberal, even sort of left-wing Bernie Sanders friends. And they said, we even got one of them to listen to your podcast and she really likes it, but only because of the Kmele Foster episode. So you have an influence.
That's good. I like that.
It's done really well. That episode, people have loved it and responded to it, and definitely one of my favorites. So,
yeah. Well, you're a good inquisitor, so that had something to do with it. Yeah. But I won't. You know, no false modesty here. I'm interesting, and I have unique perspectives that are well researched and thoughtful,
and extremely good looking, which serves no purpose here. But
the handsomeness is very, very useful to me. I did have a barbershop mishap, so like my mustache.
Oh my God! I just noticed.
Yeah, it's very, very.
I didn't even notice that.
I don't like it at all.
I've been talking to you for an hour. I didn't know.
Yeah, you were wondering, something was weird. That's what it is.
No, it looks good.
I don't like it at all. I'm waiting for my facial hair to grow back. So 2 weeks. Although I have to do CNN next week.
You're going to be on CNN?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's just like a test taping for the new Andy Levy show. But at some point I'll probably do the real thing unless I totally humiliate myself.
Well, what do you know about Russia?
Well, I'm in cahoots with Putin. I've been working for him to foment fake news. Yeah. Hence my rigid refusal to accept the narrative that the Trump administration is in cahoots with the Putin regime, because I think there are actually worse things to indict the Trump administration for.
No.
So I focus on those things.
There's nothing worse than what he might possibly could have sort of done.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Let's get down to business, because we have a lot of unfinished business, and that's really why you're here.
Well, let go.
So, yeah, we only got actually part of your story last time, and we only got to some of the political stuff that we covered. We really didn't finish either one. So,
okay.
Here's what's happening.
We won't finish it today either, but we can go.
Yeah, well, we'll never be finished. You and me. It's going to go on and on forever, baby. So tomorrow is August 9th, 2017, and that is the anniversary of the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And you and I have been talking recently about stuff that's been going on in Missouri, not directly related to that, but of course indirectly. And the NAACP, what was it, last week? Called for, they put out it's a travel advisory.
Right. It's the sort of thing that like the Department of State will put out. I do a lot of international traveling, so I'll have to check the website to see what the hell is going on in Venezuela this week. Oh, total meltdown, crisis. They advised me not to go there. So the local Missouri branch of the NAACP decided to issue a travel advisory for the state because the governor of said state determined that it was appropriate for them to reform their laws with respect to your ability to sue a particular organization for discrimination, and they put caps on the penalties that could be enacted in the event of discrimination. And the NAACP went apeshit, I think is a good phrase, and decided to issue a travel advisory. A
travel advisory to all people of color.
Yes.
In which they said, I believe, that it would be unsafe for them to travel in Missouri.
Yeah.
And that was the word I'm pretty sure they used was unsafe.
That sounds about right to me.
In response, immediately, I mean, they added some other things in their advisory, but it was an immediate response to this thing you're talking about, which was essentially, right, removing African Americans from the protected class status, so that
I think it was just broad reform. I think that it is if I'm not mistaken, the change wasn't just removing African Americans; it was changing their entire approach to this whole notion of protected classes,
right? In general, just that making it much harder or maybe impossible to sue for discrimination, right? Yeah, okay,
yeah, probably not impossible, but harder.
On the face of it, therefore, the travel advisory is utterly illogical. I mean, if that's what it's about,
I would say so,
because there's not. I mean, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's some historical context there. You mentioned the Mike Brown shooting, so there have been some protests, but even before that, as a number of the articles alluded to, you had a lot of concern about disproportionate blacks being stopped, disproportionate to their share of the population in Missouri. In terms of traffic stops and arrests, et cetera, et cetera. And that has been a concern for a very long time. So much so that in 2000, they instituted a new law that requires police to actually document the race of every person that they have an interaction with. And every single year, they issue a report about the volume of stops that they're making and the percentage of the racial demographics of the people they're stopping.
Was that a Black Lives Matter demand?
No, I mean, this is back to 2000. So they've been doing this for like a decade.
But I bet it was an NAACP demand to record the race of every stopped person. I bet you. I mean, I would imagine that,
I haven't seen that. I mean, it depends on Black Lives Matter is so, it's a nebulous organization with a bunch of different component parts. And there have been a lot of different demands made. Some of those lists are more thoughtfully crafted than others.
Yeah.
Which I
just mean the recording of the race of all people stopped by the police in Missouri. I'm sure that was categorized under racial justice. Like they would think of that as a means toward racial justice.
I mean, that is, the reason for requiring this to be done was the suspicion that if Black people are being stopped more frequently, that the obvious explanation for those stops happening is racism, bias. Look, maybe it's possible. It's worth talking about. It might even be worth investigating, especially if there are lots of complaints about that.
But I had like more of a meta reaction to it. I didn't know about it until you just told me about that about an hour ago, which is, look who's demanding that cops record the race of everyone they come across, right? which if you step back from that and look at that, that's Nazi Germany. I mean, that's right. I mean, that's literally what they were doing. They were recording the race of everyone on the street. They were making sure that the race of every person was recorded officially by the government. That's the first thing they did.
Well, I suppose this is a little different. The goal obviously is to track the interactions, and they're only tracking the race of people they stop. The expectation being that they will stop fewer people because it will be so obvious that they're stopping people only because they want to stop black
You're
folk.
already disappointing me.
I'm sorry.
What are we, 10 minutes into this?
I'm so sorry. I don't even know what I did
This
wrong.
is the kind of thing I learned from you. Which
too much.
No, which is that these measures that are hailed as racially progressive.
Yeah.
Actually, we've talked about this. You've taught me, this is one of the many things you've taught me, reify this thing that is the worst thing or one of the worst ideas that America's ever had.
Well, this is the obscenity of sort of people. It's the obscenity and the sadness of people latching on to the concept of race and rooting their identities in it. I think it was just the other day, and I think I probably sent this to you in an iMessage. I was like Jamel Bowie or something like that. The guy at
he
Slate.
blocked me a long time ago.
Oh, did he?
In fact,
okay, so I couldn't show
over
you.
Ferguson, he blocked me over Ferguson. He was one of the progressives who was yelling for the National Guard to come in. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember
that
this.
That was racial progress. Also, was having the National Guard come in. to Ferguson, and it
looks a lot more like the 1960s. Like
and
they're
I
coming in
said
to
him,
protect you from the racist police department.
And I think, as I recall at the time, I said to him, excuse me, look at what you're calling for. That's progress. I mean, and he blocked me. But anyway, so I didn't actually see what he wrote.
Well, he doesn't want to have conversations. What he wrote was about this HBO show that is going to present some sort of alternative history in which Confederate, I believe, is the name of the series. At this point, I suspect people have heard about it, but the series is an alternative history in which the South won. And I guess it's set in the present day. We don't actually know. All we know is that there's a concept for the show. The script hasn't even been written. All we know is the guys from Game of Thrones are attached. Just two white guys, which is highly problematic. And the tweet that he wrote was something along the lines of, I'm not interested in a show about sort of celebrating the South or something like that. Actually, no, I'm getting this story entirely wrong. What I actually sent you was a tweet about him. It was a tweet about a woman who said that she had Confederate pride. That's what it was.
Oh, I did see this.
Yeah.
Yes.
She said she had Confederate pride, and he sort of just kind of responded with maybe an emoji or something like, wow, speaks for itself. This is gross. And the thought that I had immediately was, she has Confederate pride, and she is detoxified that thing, whitewashed it, so to speak. See what I did there? And has made it something that she can take pride in, rather than having all of this gross historical baggage and saying, I forever am sullen. I cannot escape my heritage. My heritage is something I can be proud of. And you, Mr. Bowie, are proud to be Black, which is kind of bizarre. An identity that was created for you by a slaveholding class who wanted to oppress your people. And now it is something that you sort of hold up and have sanctified and are constantly. There are people who talk about how Black is beautiful and all sorts of other things. I think the process is very much the same. The reality is that obviously the roles were different. The Confederacy was fighting a war in the South to preserve its ability to hold slavery, among other goals. But that is the principal thing. I get in trouble if I talk about the complexity of the reason why a group of people might want to go to war with another group of people. There can only be one reason, apparently. But
it's either evil or good, right?
Yeah, sure. But it's definitely not just taxes. But you look at your sort of historical identity, the tribe to which you belong, and you paint the best picture of it possible so that you can have that identity. Having an identity in a tribe that you can be a part of is seductive for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, but one of the reasons is because it's so clarifying. It gives you a very clear sense of who you are and what your purpose is, and oftentimes there's a lore attached to it, so you know who the bad guys are. It makes it so much easier to sort out the world, to organize everything into good and bad. So
Yeah, no, now I'm remembering why I had you back on the show.
Oh, good.
Because I love talking to you.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
No, it's always so good.
This is when you remember that mid conversation.
When you actually start talking. And I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember.
Yeah.
Neil's really smart. And I learn a lot from him. So actually, here's the thing that we didn't even, I don't even think we got to it. I think I promised that we would get to it in the first go around, but we didn't do it, which is I didn't talk about how you've changed my mind about a lot of things. And this is it. So in fact, basically about Ferguson, because when the Mike Brown shooting happened, I was like the vast majority of Americans and almost immediately convinced that it was a racist, bad shooting. And I remember like some of his, some of the teenagers, do you remember this? Were like being interviewed by CNN on TV and they were just standing and saying, hey, he had his hands up and he said,
hands up, don't shoot.
Don't shoot. Right. And they were so believable.
Yeah.
I was positive that this is what happened.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it seems, look, this narrative it was very common. Like everyone was saying it all over the city. That narrative was it was there. We knew it was true. It wasn't until after some of the autopsy data started to come in, particularly from the Justice Department, which had stepped in because of the furor on the ground. Like people were so upset that the Justice Department had to come in, and they had to trust the Justice Department's examination of the body because the Justice Department had been pretty hostile towards the Ferguson Police Department.
Yeah, it's one of the few good things the Justice Department has done. I thought.
Well, I think it's certainly useful to have them come in and sort of serve as a.
Well, not just that, but their bigger report about Ferguson also is what I'm thinking about more, which is right track.
I think
the arrests and the stops and basically the extortion of people generally, but especially Black people through fines and tickets. And that's how they funded the Ferguson city government and this county government, I believe, and all that. But let's get to that in a second. So, okay. I'm totally Black Lives Matter. Person at that point.
I believe you tweeted out some sort of graphic of someone standing on a car that said like, we must support our troops.
Well, that was later. That was Baltimore. So
was it Baltimore? It's still the same.
But I was still,
I
was still, I'm saying that was what, a year later?
Yeah.
I was, I know. Thank you for embarrassing me. Well, no, I think I'm, well, we'll get to that in a second too.
There's a way in which it's defensible. You can make
good. We'll get to that too. No, but I was, the Black Lives Matter narrative or analysis or claim, whatever you want to say, about policing and race. I was there 100%. And then, it was, I really think so much of this is just the videos. I mean, there was one, it seemed like there was one video after another in which you saw a cop shoot someone in the back, even though there's only really one video. And even that one, it turns out much later after I was Kmele Fosterized, wasn't even really what we thought it was. But certainly for a solid at least year, I was completely there. And I just remember being emotionally just really wrecked, I mean, I would come, or my girlfriend would come home many days and I'd be in tears and she didn't understand what was happening and would ask me what was wrong and thought something had happened to me. And I would just be sobbing at my chair because I'd just seen another Black kid get shot. Yeah. And I think I just described the experience of millions of Americans. Right. And so that's why even though now I am Kmele Fosterized and think that there is a lot wrong with how we thought about things then, I'm still sympathetic because I get it. Those videos are extremely powerful. And if they're decontextualized, which is what they were, of course.
Well, they're put into a different context.
And they're all anecdotal by definition. So I was completely there and I just thought it was what they say now, which is an epidemic of racist police violence. Right. That mass incarceration was driven by racism, that these shootings were driven by, if not individual police officers' racism, it was, some kind of systemic racism. I guess I even believed in that idea then, and I don't anymore, I don't think. So that was just 3 years ago, and I've come a long way. I've changed a lot on that. I haven't gone all the way, and sometimes I'm embarrassed and I check myself and I think, God damn it, what did Foster do to me? So, and it's, and sometimes I think you made me into a right winger on this, and I say that to you jokingly, but it's not really right wing.
I mean, my perspective on these things is certainly not right wing. And I mean, in a nutshell, and I'm sure I said some version of this before, but I'll do it much, much quicker this time. Like, I'm concerned about these issues. I want to see reform. I worry that balkanizing these issues and only talking about them in the context of race creates a situation in which you are much less likely to make progress. The reforms that are going to be suggested are much less likely to be about like actually making meaningful change, and will be about trying to ameliorate the particular concern. And the particular concern, the thing that takes center stage in these conversations, is the disproportionate impact on Black folks, and the supposition that the cops are racist and that is why this is happening. Which it is certainly possible that the reason for the overrepresentation in crime stats is Black people. And is like race, is like they are Black, therefore the cops are behaving in this way, whether they're doing it explicitly
Racial
because they're
prejudice.
racist and they know it. Yeah. Or it's just like implicit association with crime and they treat them differently. Maybe. My great crime is that I insist on evidence for that thing. And oftentimes it is quite difficult to prove. And I insist on evidence because if that's the problem, I want to address it. But if the problem is other things, if there's stuff that we can do to actually mitigate the possibility of citizens of the country being shot and killed by police unnecessarily, or even just harassed by police or stopped by police unnecessarily, we should do those things. But we don't get around to it if we politicize things. And part of the reason why I think that happens is because, and this is a fairly recent recognition for me, like racial politics is politics, which it sounds kind of silly, maybe tautological, but the insight there is like politics is tribalism. And the reason why other people like will hate the position that you arrive at isn't merely because, well, this is like, these are race issues, these are Black issues, and that's what they're advancing. Like Black issues are liberal issues, they're democratic issues. Like they have like different things that their teams are supporting, and they switch sides on these issues all the time. But to the extent that you've politicized this in that way, rather than this being sort of a broader issue of just human suffering and something we can do to protect all American citizens, you've painted it in a particularly narrow way that makes it very easy to make this the most charged issue imaginable, one that we can't talk about without making this about an assertion that the police are doing things because of their racial motivations, and making other people say, all you ever do is, call other people racist. I mean, this isn't about race. If you're concerned about race, this is the dodge that they get to employ, right? It's, well, if you're concerned about somebody killing Black people, well, you should know that Black people kill most Black people. Why are we having that conversation again? I thought the concern was getting the police to not shoot unarmed people, in which case that's a non sequitur. We shouldn't be talking about that. But they open the door to this by politicizing the conversation in that particular way.
Yeah, it's not only not the real issue, it's actually become enraging to me, again, since I've been in your presence. When I actually started to do the research on the data and found out the just astonishing amount of human wreckage in white skin, that's been done by the war on drugs and the war on crime, police violence, police brutality, mass incarceration. We can talk about that too. But anyway, but I want to make sure that people are really clear about this analysis, okay, that I essentially learned. I mean, I got the basic idea from you, and then I went and developed it more, but it's your idea that I started with. It's how I turned on this. So by claiming that it's the racism of the police officers doing these things is really problematic, right? Because then the answer is simply to get rid of the racist police officers, make sure they're not racist. Well, the problem you pointed out to me is that what these cops are doing, and you can look at the data on this, and you can look at just about any of these cases, and it's true, what they are doing in almost every case is what? Enforcing the law.
Sure. A
law or set of laws that were determined by, and this is when you get really radical and when you really upset the apple cart. I'm talking about you, Kmele. These were laws that were passed and enacted, drafted by a democratic state or city or nation, by the people. Yeah. So they are doing what we Americans, not those of us who don't vote, but Americans who vote, they're doing what they want. Sure. They're demanding. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So that logic right there, to me, that's devastating. devastating critique of almost everything that's said about race and crime nowadays, right? And what you just said then was that the way it's politicized serves, I think this is what you said, serves the interest of particular groups or tribes. In this case, it would be, you're saying, the Democratic Party. And maybe you could say just sort of liberals generally, but certainly the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Because why? So if we convince the country that it's racist cops doing all this, well, how does it serve the Democrats?
Well, I think it serves what it does is it taps into sort of the regular way that political tribes engage and interact with one another. It turns it into sort of just one side's political perspective on this, and not just any political perspective, a political issue that is wrapped in racial politics. And while racial politics at some point might have been about sort of the civil rights movement and various other things in the 1960s, like racial politics today is a mishmash of all manner of issues, some of which are entirely contrived, some of which might be legitimate and real. It's situations where we're pressing for diversity, even if that diversity comes by way of like sort of actively discriminating against people who might be otherwise qualified, but for the fact that there are too many white kids at this particular institution. So, you know, and I mean, there's always
Asians are actually the problem now.
Yes,
they're dealing with the Asian hordes.
They always are.
The Asian
obviously.
hordes at Harvard.
Yeah.
This is actually, if people don't know this, they should Google this. It's actually quite scandalous. The Asians, it's pretty clear that
so the Asians are scandalous.
The Asians are scandalous.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty clear that there are quotas at all the elite colleges and universities for Asians in admissions. And the good thing is that a lot of Asian families, parents are suing.
Yeah. Well, we can only speculate about this because these universities have been aggressive about not allowing this data to come out.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't think I've mentioned this to you. One of my missions for this podcast, I've always wanted to get somebody anonymous to be on the podcast from an admissions committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Get the inside scoop. I have personally talked to many because I've been at those places for a long, long time. And I've just happened to know people on admissions committee. It's all true. Everything you think. It's all true. It's completely just naked, manipulation of skin color for various reasons, mostly for virtue signaling to avoid being called a racist and to show the numbers are correct. And we're therefore a virtuous institution. Right. But anyway, where were we? The cops. When you, I don't think you answered my question.
Oh,
how does it serve the Democratic Party to say
that's what I was saying.
that Mike Brown was killed because Darren Wilson was racist?
I don't think it's narrowly in service to the Democratic Party. I think the
argument is actually there, but go ahead.
Well, I think compartmentalizing the issues makes it more likely to be another just sort of counterproductive political bludgeon. To the extent it's useful to the Democratic Party, it's because not only does it make it another sort of conventional political bludgeon, I think it also makes it an issue that is likely to attract crusaders to it. And crusaders are people who I don't so much care about this getting solved, not for sort of selfish reasons that they might be aware of. But the most important thing here is that I sort of crash into this wall at full speed. Like I'm willing to be fodder here. The most important thing is that I make a loud noise that other people hear because a grave injustice is being done. And yeah, this may turn people off. Maybe it turns them off when I say America is racist as hell. That what's wrong with the criminal justice system is racism. Obviously, y'all don't want to talk about it. Maybe that'll turn some people off. But if they don't want to hear the truth, they don't want to hear the truth. Again, I'm saying a lot of things. Like I'm very animated. There are plenty of people who say, right on, brother. But does it matter if we fix this issue? No. The truth of the matter is that this is very useful to me. I feel great. I know that I'm doing the right thing. The world is clear to me. The enemy is racism and it's everywhere. And all I need to do is take a loud vocal stand and beat this drum particularly hard. There is great satisfaction in just telling the truth, quote unquote.
But am I right that what you're saying is that even if they are successful in removing racism from this country,
what they can't be,
you are claiming that even if that were to happen, they would still be shooting people in the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And there would still be mass incarceration.
Half of the people who police have shot in this country, like over the course of the last several years, since the Washington Post has been tracking this and the Guardian, which this is a good thing that has happened as a consequence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And we weren't really tracking this stuff in any sort of active way prior to that. These national databases of police shootings are still being provided for us by private media organizations. Credit where it's due. Like, racial politics does move the needle in that respect. We're tracking that. So that's a huge deal, I think. That's a step forward. But the evidence, right, that data doesn't point in the direction of, oh my God, like mass hysteria, they're killing Black people every day, which is a claim you hear routinely. The numbers are not nearly as stark as most people think. And it's one of those things where when I say that doesn't mean it doesn't matter to me. It's still really important. Yeah. If the government is killing one person unnecessarily in the street, I am concerned about it. Yeah. But it's hysteria matters, and proportionate outrage is appropriate. Like, should one be outraged about the fact that, you know, a Google employee wrote a memorandum about his feelings about sort of Google's diversity initiative, and not concerned about the fact that Apple is refusing to sell its VPN products on the App Store because the Chinese government insists that they stop. Like, if you've talked about one of those things and not the other, like, there's a problem here. Like, it's obvious which one of those things is more significant. But again, it's proportionate outrage.
Yeah.
Which we don't have on most of those issues.
Let's drill down a little bit on the numbers and the data. So one of the first things I found out, everyone should go look at The Counted, which is the Guardian's database on police killings in this country. And they've kept it for the last 2 years now, I believe. They have the numbers for 2015 and 2016, right?
And they're tracking 17 too. Maybe they're not. I know Washington Post is.
Right. So anyway, if you look at that, and you'll see that it's roughly 1,000 deaths per year at the hands of the police. And then among those, it's about 20% are unarmed. It's something like that, you know. Okay, so it's somewhere around 200 or 300.
Yeah, I'm seeing
unarmed.
Like 7. I ran the numbers too, but from 2015 to 2017, like mid, and the unarmed number I see there is 7.2%. The weird thing is, though, there are plenty of those that aren't categorized at all, like undetermined, which I believe is 4.7% based on the numbers that I'm looking at here. And then there are other people who have like things that look like guns, like toy guns, for example, which is a kind of scary 4.2%.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, okay, whatever it is, I mean, we can
but it's not huge.
Everyone on this issue can agree that it's been, you know, several hundred people who we would all agree were unarmed, who were killed in some way or another by the police in the last 2 years.
166 between the 1st of January 2015 and 5/15/2017.
Right. So let's say it is somewhere around there. It's a few hundred people in this country. Okay, so you and I and DeRay Mackison all agree that is horrific, no matter how you slice it.
Absolutely.
Okay. However, first of all, you do say, and I completely agree with you, that's actually, well, I don't know if you say this, I say this. If you look at the laws that we have, all democratically enacted laws, and you look at the police that have been hired and armed to enforce those laws democratically. These are all democratic decisions. These are all people voting for these things. Those numbers are tiny compared to what you would expect them to be. I'm actually surprised at how few people have been killed because we have so many laws prohibiting so many things, and so many cops, and so many prisons, and so many big guns, and even tanks now, as everyone knows. It's remarkable they only kill a couple hundred unarmed people. Now, the 800 armed people, well, you know, they were armed. And if you look at those cases, they're almost always basically shooting at the cops, or they're clearly posing a real threat. The cops are pretty clearly not making that much shit up. Occasionally, certainly they embellish. And every once in a while, they make things up out of whole cloth, no doubt. But if you look at
I don't know what the proportion is, right? Like, do I trust them on average? I guess, you know, let's presume they're making up stuff.
Unhealthy. I'm not saying anyone should. You should never ever. Kids out there, listen to me. Don't ever trust a police officer. Okay, he does not have your interest at heart. Okay, his position requires that he not have your interest. Okay, kids, listen to me. I want all the children to gather around. the speakers and listen. You do not trust the cops, and that is what Thaddeus Russell is saying. Okay? And I'm not kidding. Everyone who knows me knows that. That is not what I'm saying here. What I'm trying to do, what I think you're trying to do, is actually, at the end of the day, remove as much as possible, and maybe even entirely, the cops' power. Right? We want to reduce, certainly radically reduce.
Sure.
You and I want to reduce. Does everyone hear that?
I want to limit the scope of things that they have any involvement in. Like, why do we need armed agents of the state enforcing traffic laws, for example? This is silly. If your tags are expired, like, we have methods for dealing with this. We'll take a photo and we'll send it to someone. If you're driving on the road and you're not driving dangerously, sending a guy with a gun to come chase you down the highway, probably not a great idea.
But certainly, Kmele, you want the cops to enforce the drug laws.
No. Well, of course, I don't want these drug laws either.
See, a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people, if they listen to that episode that you and I did, they would think, wait, he does sound kind of right wing, but what is you're about to freak them out. What is your position on drugs and the law?
Legalize all drugs.
All of them.
All drugs, and not decriminalize, legalize all drugs. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Prohibition is a bad thing. It makes drugs more dangerous and more harmful to people who are addicted. If they need help or want to get help, it can be harder to get help. It creates a culture in which we demonize drugs and imagine that they are something they are not, which again makes it very hard to deal with something that you don't understand. And obviously, it has an entire class of citizen who work for the state, who carry around firearms, and who are shooting people and arresting people for doing something that they want to do to themselves. They want to purchase a product from someone and they want to use it to feel good for whatever reason. And it's worth noting that most people who use drugs, however hard they are, and I'm saying this in the midst of the opioid epidemic.
This is when it gets really radical.
I am totally aware of it. The vast majority of people who use a hard drug will not become addicted. The overwhelming majority of people will not become addicts. And what do I mean by that? In some cases, I'm talking like 10, 12% for some of the hardest drugs that you can think of might actually become addicted to those substances. Mm-hmm. And most of the people who become addicts, like who do get off of those drugs, they don't need treatment to get off those drugs. They get off of them. Our understanding of addiction medically, clinically, is very limited. It's something that we're growing sort of a body of evidence around this that is informed by science. But there's a hell of a lot of superstition there. And the superstition is what keeps those policies in place. And those policies do not make our society safer.
Yep.
So yes, my perspective on that is quite radical. Maybe I've lost some friends.
Yeah, I doubt it. It's like, first of all, calling for legalization of drugs other than marijuana, that's radical step number one. And then you call for legalization of all drugs. That's even further. But then you go even further, which is you say that they're not nearly as harmful because everybody agrees. Even a lot of people who are for legalization agree that or think that they're harmful. But you went and read this guy Carl Hart. This book or two books, right? Columbia University.
Does he have two books?
Professor.
I think it might be one. High Price is the name
but he's been working on
his
this
book. But
for
he's
a long
been
time.
He's a professor of neurobiology. He studies
at Columbia University.
At Columbia University, tenured professor, incredibly bright, and studies drugs, has given drugs to people in labs. And sort of Carl's bold insight is that addicts are not irrational. The test that he did in his laboratory, and you need to go look at the study to understand the various ways in which this is controlled, is he gave people an option, a choice between cash or something with cash value like a voucher and like medical grade drugs. Medical grade, I believe it was meth in these particular studies, but it might have been something else. And like most of the people were choosing this cash. It's the cash that, yes, you can't game it. You couldn't trade that cash thing for crack as soon as you left the laboratory. I'm sure there are people who thought that. You should go read the study. But yeah, he got these results, and the results like shouldn't be shocking to people. Like if most adults know someone who uses or has used, and not all addicts are the same. Yeah. And not all addicts are addicted to drugs. Like some people are addicted to work or sex or whatever else. They have a similar sort of relationship with those things. And interestingly, the dopamine response, the way their brains change in response to their drug of choice is very, very similar. So
I love the way you define addiction. How do you do it?
Gosh, well, I mean, I was using the DSM definition, but I might have some trouble if I try to recall it on the spot. But it's effectively a practice or a behavior that is like disrupting your ability to like meet your commitments or obligations or something along those lines,
or to do what you want.
Yeah, to accomplish the goals that you want,
to have the life that you want.
Yeah,
not one that's prescribed for you. Yeah. Right. So I think I love that definition.
And I'm not
so
even
much.
And interestingly, like one could be even more radical than that. The truth of the matter is, like in some cases, like addicts make choices. Like the decision to be escapist and to bury yourself in your work and to not deal with the fact that your wife is likely to leave you. I've certainly
do you know any workaholics?
I mean, I'm a workaholic in ways, but I don't use my work to escape from my personal challenges.
You love it.
And I'm saying that, but some people do that.
Right.
Like we know people like that.
Sure.
We don't call them drug addicts. Right. You see someone who is like morbidly obese and they go to the 7-Eleven and they're purchasing several pastries. The choice that they've made is however hard the rest of those things are in life. I don't really want to deal with those things. This makes me feel good. I mean, is it a rational decision? Well, it's their choice. Should they make a different decision? You may think so. I would probably recommend it because I think life is a gift. You should do something with it. But this is what they want to do.
Right.
And there's something about the way that we talk about addiction where we take control away from the person who is engaged in this activity.
Exactly.
And I think that makes it easier for them to indulge in this behavior. It's not you.
That's right.
It's not you.
That's exactly
it's not
right.
me. I wish I could get over this.
That's
I
exactly
can't.
Right.
It's a really convenient excuse.
Yeah, man. Your definition of addiction is so liberating in so many ways. I mean, I think it's like, it could be like the soul, the heart, if we get it in the popular consciousness of a really radical set of changes. I mean, cultural, legal, the whole thing.
Yeah, I stole that from Carl too. So
I got it.
Learned a lot.
I got it from both of you guys.
Yeah.
But I mean, because historically, and including right now, that's Americans think of these things as things not only outside of one's control, but we're basically making claims for other people in their lives and what their preferences should be and what their behavior should be and what's
conservative.
What's unhealthy. I know what's unhealthy for other people, right? And that's what you're saying. That's what I love about it so much. That's where you and I really merge. I love that. But anyway, Carl is making empirical claims that these things simply aren't nearly as addictive as we believe and not nearly as physically harmful, et cetera. So when you told me about this, I think it was right around Ferguson, actually, that time. And I was like, no, come on. Everybody's seen the movies. And, and then I said, and I stopped myself. I was about to say, and everybody knows people. And then I started to think about people I've actually known.
Yeah.
And hey, I grew up in Berkeley in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And then I went to a hippie college, and then I was in New York City. So I've been around lots and lots of people who have done lots and lots of drugs. And my best friend in high school, he did a bunch of cocaine for years when he was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I smoked cocaine with not crack. Maybe we did smoke crack. He ended up smoking crack back in the 80s. And everybody was worried about him. And he now is the president of a publishing company. And he has 3 kids. And he's still married to the same woman he met in high school. And they live in a beautiful house on a beautiful street in Berkeley, California.
He's obviously the exception.
Yeah, except that everybody else I know, and I know many people who did heroin and they believed themselves to be addicted to heroin. They did it so much. I'm talking for years. I was related to someone who was doing heroin, who did heroin for years and years and years. So I know this story intimately. He is close to 60 years old. He's perfectly healthy. He hasn't done anything except weed for 20 years. And he lives a nice life on the Northern California coast. And I know another woman who did heroin every day for 2 years with her boyfriend, with needles, the whole 9 yards. And she hasn't touched it in a long, long time and is totally fine. And I can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
I did coke, I did speed. I did a lot of stuff, not to that level, but I did it. And it wasn't like, I did actually quite a bit of coke. And when I was in my teens and early 20s, never once did it get its hooks in me in that way, you know.
Yeah.
But
which is not to say that it might not with certain people.
Yeah.
And look, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture here. I mean, certain folks might be more likely to become addicted, like the way in which we respond to these drugs sort of chemically.
And Carl allows for
I'm
that.
not aware of it. Yeah, Carl is a lot more nuanced in the way that he talks about addiction than I would have expected him to be, because there are people like the guy who wrote The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, whose name is escaping me right now, but he's a professor in Vancouver, Gabor Mate. Yeah, Gabor Mate is his perspective on this is childhood trauma like correlates very tightly with drug abuse, and that the childhood trauma like correlates more tightly with that than something about overeating and obesity or something like that. Like it's a really tight correlation. Carl doesn't know. I don't even know that he's skeptical of it. He just doesn't have a perspective on it. But, you know, we can go beyond, you know, personal anecdotes about this. There are surveys that are done routinely. If folks are not familiar, they should check out the Bennett drug charts from the Baker Institute. They publish these things every single year where they ask people, like, when was the last time you used any of these drugs? And while, of course, people can lie about these things, they have been doing it for decades now. And the numbers are pretty steady. Most people are not using these drugs very frequently, i.e. like within like 3 months of one another. So, you know, even if it's 1-2% of the population that are addicted to hard drugs, and it is that low, that's still a lot of people. That being said, changes things pretty dramatically. Like the notion of making policy that is applicable to 100% of the population because of concern that 1-2% of the population might try these things, like that seems completely irrational to me. And not even might try these things, but might actually become addicted.
Well, it's the last intellectual barrier to legalization, because this is the argument that people are holding on to. This is the last read in the prohibitionist argument now. I mean, and they're all sort of agreeing, even liberals who are, you know, saying, oh, we can legalize weed, but we can't legalize the powders because they are so harmful and addictive. Yeah. That's what Jeff Sessions is saying about all drugs. But anyway, that's the last thing they have.
Yeah, Jeff is still holding on to the gateway drug mythology.
Okay. Well, but I mean, but for a long, long time, right? There were other reasons, many, many reasons were arrayed to justify prohibition. You know, it would make people crazy. It would make people stop working. It would make people die and instantly. You know, if you go back to Reefer Madness, or it would make them be susceptible to Chinese kidnappers and sex slave rings and all the rest of it. But, so that all that stuff, all those myths have been demolished, and now there's this one last, turns out, looks like a myth that you and Carl Hart and maybe I am attacking. So it's really, really fundamental. Like that's the bedrock, I guess, the remaining bedrock for all these drug laws. Yeah. If you don't have that anymore, there's no reason to have these laws. Sure. And then the conservatives will say to that, oh, well, but only 10% of prisoners are serving time because of drug offenses. Right. Okay. Yeah. And then I did a little research because I like to do that. And I found out that according to the FBI now, you know, the FBI can lie too. I guess they
can get it wrong,
or, you know, or overemphasize this or something, or exaggerate it. But according to the FBI, roughly 50% of all violent offenders, the people who we all agree should be dealt with in some way, are members or affiliates of gangs whose reason for existence is the drug trade. Yeah, right? It's a major
source of income for them.
Yeah, so, you know, prohibition creates the black market. And then the bad people enter it. But anyway, so that's, you know. Right there. Yeah. We have changed this world, I think, dramatically if we do that. I mean, we have made the world so much better, in particular, by the way, for all those poor people of color that we talk about all the time.
Yeah. To the extent that people are uniquely concerned about those folks.
Well, that's one of the things. That's where I start to actually get pissed off about that. One of the things, and this is really radical, but it shouldn't be, is that I realize that there's an incredible amount of shame, I guess, among white people about this. We are not actually allowed, seriously, to feel anything at all about what the state does to white people. Have you ever heard of anybody getting upset, crying about white people and being shot by cops or being incarcerated for no good reason? Yeah. How many videos of white kids getting shot do you know about?
It's actually interesting because once you start to do it, there are certain people who say, see, when it's a white person, like they get really excited about it. Like that's the thing you want to talk about. That's the thing that you want to cover extensively. So I do think that there's probably a bit of an instinct not to talk about that story quite so much. And it's weird because one can't prove this. Publication bias is what they call it in the sciences. When there is, when you are conducting a study, research, and you get an outcome that is inconsistent with what people expect you to discover in this particular context, one might have a much more difficult time like actually getting that study result published. One might not even submit it for fear that they won't be able to get it published and it'll be attached to them. And it'll look like they're trying to buck the popular trend. And you might not even be able to get a study funded if said study seems to be a study that is going to push against sort of the conventional wisdom. And it's one reason to be particularly concerned about scientific consensuses when they emerge, because it can be really expensive for someone personally, professionally, to actually pursue an alternative hypothesis, which is really hard for people, I think, to wrap their minds around, because so many of us tend to think about science as like objective and data driven, and it's just about the facts. But the universe is a lot more complicated than that. And people who do scientific research are humans, and they have their own biases and predilections, and they're not interested in turning over certain stones. Hence concern about people who study, say, race and IQ, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the research that's not being done, I know this because I had to do it myself and it should have been readily available, but I actually had to crunch the numbers, are simply the number of white people in prison now. It's hard to find. You have to like generate the numbers, yourself.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of
and I found out that currently, as we speak right now, there are about 500,000 white people in prisons, and that doesn't even include the jail populations.
Wow.
This is state and federal prisons right now. Yeah, it's in my article that you read. 500,000, and that's just right now. So if you look at the history of the drug war and the war on crime, which go back to the 60s, who knows? But it's got to be many, many millions of white people put in prisons, cages, for reasons we all agree are unjustified, right? And when I found this out, when I wrote that article, whenever that was, 6 months ago, and I started to talk to people, on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And when I would meet, professors or lefties in my personal life.
This was, I think you have to say what article is. This is the piece in which you concluded it by tallying up the total number of people who had been incarcerated in the country and suggesting that if we let out every black and brown person, we would still be, what is it, like the 10th largest incarcerator of humans on the president.
Than that, I forget, but it's
on
top 10
in the country. Yeah.
We have one of the top 5 or 6 highest
it's incredible
incarceration rates if we let out every person of color from prison today.
And it's true. Like violent crime is a significant percentage of the total prison population are there for violent crimes. It's almost certainly the case that some of those violent crimes are related to the drug war. Maybe there are fundamental, in fact, I accept that there are fundamental differences in the United States versus other places, but I can't quantify that. All I know is that that's a lot of people and no one should be comfortable with that. And the solution shouldn't be, well, we just got to build more prisons.
Well, here's what's enraging. Okay? So that it turns out that the people who are supposed to be the most uncomfortable with things like that, like people who are calling for justice in the criminal justice system all day, every day. When I present those numbers to them, do you know what they say? They say to me, there is a standard argument.
No, what is this?
And I'm talking about among like professors who do this stuff, who study this stuff, who write things about this, and activists. The argument is, you haven't heard? I think you have heard this. And they actually use this phrase, those were the collateral damage in the war against black people.
I've never heard anyone actually say that.
Yeah. George Cicciarello Maher. Shout out, George. You said that to me on Twitter, but I've heard it repeated many times.
That's incredible.
Well, Elizabeth Hinton, her book, that's the one I reviewed for that piece for Reason that we're talking about. That's her argument. She basically mentions white people twice or something in that book. It's a 400-page analysis of it's extremely detailed. And there's no evidence in there that anything has ever happened to white people by the state in the last 50 years. But she does say at one point, well, some white people certainly suffered as a result of the racist war on crime.
Yeah. Well,
that's it.
This is
So they don't actually give a shit.
Yeah.
About putting people in cages.
Yeah.
They only care about the distribution.
Well, I mean,
the particular distribution of who gets put into cages.
Yeah. They'd be fine if the number of white people increased sufficiently high that the percentage is evened out and it was demographically representative.
Apparently.
If
okay
someone holds that position, that is precisely what they're articulating, which that ought to make folks very uncomfortable. I've certainly made that observation before, that oftentimes the disproportionate concern for sort of me and the likelihood of me getting stopped by the cops versus Thad is like, well, Thad, you were inconvenienced, but for Kmele, this is a tragedy. Like, we need to do something immediately. That there's something gross about that sort of sentiment. That certainly doesn't seem like directionally correct. But I think I have a sense of where it comes from, and this is part of an email that I almost sent you and didn't send because I was getting ready to send it. I was high from lack of sleep and from overwork and probably Adderall. Not drug. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm usually taking Adderall, which is meth, same drug. The thought that I had, what occurred to me was that there is, it seems for a lot of people, a desire to achieve some sort of ultimate justice, like justice in the perfect sort of Platonist form. Mm-hmm. And this ideal justice is to roll back all of the sort of past injury and to return us all to a state in which sort of fairness is there. We've adjudicated all past wrongs. We have put Black people at the place that they should appropriately be had there been no slavery and no discrimination and no Jim Crow and no various other bad things. Like, we can figure out what that is in some way, shape, or form, and we can eventually achieve ultimate justice, because any condition that we live under today in which that's not where we are is unjust and unfair. Mm-hmm. It's the reason why we can refer to the whole of the society that we inhabit as, white supremacist. Yeah. It's white supremacist because the distribution, the allocation of things is not quite right. And even if we have to injure people today in order to get there, to that perfect place, this idealized place, this utopia,
but it's in the past, apparently.
It's not, the injustices were in the past. The injuries
I think you said they wanted to return to.
Well, no, they want to fix it.
Oh, I see.
They want to return to a position of perfect justice, which essentially is like this faux starting point, which never exists.
Right, that's what I was wondering.
It never has existed and never will. Right. And this is the ridiculousness of the position that they take. But so many of the social justice crusades, like, effectively boil down to that. Like, the notion that there is, an allocation today, and of course it's unfair in the sense that all manner of things have happened, like, underneath the historical cloak, where people were taken advantage of and they lost things and we didn't start at the same place. But we can't actually get to that place. And we certainly can't get anywhere near there by injuring more people today in order to try to make things slightly more fair. Furthermore, the presumption of sort of privilege presumes a great many things about any individual's circumstance. If you were molested as a child, if your parents were hideously and heinously abusive to you, if you had a traumatic car accident that you were in, like, these things may have disadvantaged you in some fundamental way. And it certainly seems like any one of those things could obliterate some metaphysical sense of privilege that you derive from your whiteness, as a matter of someone's sort of speculation about the way you would have been treated on that job application otherwise. In my own case, I know that there are jobs that I've gotten because of my appearance. I've got opportunities that have been offered to me explicitly because of my appearance. I'm
probably recently.
Yeah. It happens. It happens frequently.
Yeah.
I don't have any doubt that being of my hue and having my particular views is advantageous to me, because I can say things that other people can't, and get away with it. And folks actually have to listen to me a little bit longer.
And as we were talking about earlier, before this started, even conservatives do it now, right? They, in fact, you've been approached. I won't name them, but you've been approached recently by conservatives, a particular group, to do just that, to basically be the face because of your color.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened numerous times. Yeah.
Of their organization. Right.
I routinely get like inquiries about, well, how do we reach out to more Black people? In fact, it happens within the libertarian movement as well. I mean, there is an entire sort of contingent of libertarians who want to make anti-racism a tenet of the sort of contemporary libertarian movement. And I think that is deeply, deeply problematic. It is fetishizing a particular sort of harm and injury.
Yeah. I mean, on one level, I can't really blame these people because it is the currency.
Sure.
Right. It's the currency.
It's what right-thinking people do.
Yeah. And so that's the story that I've been thinking about recently. That's a relatively new thing. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the currency 60, 70 years ago. It's World War II. That's kind of what I'm writing about right now. But just before and during and just after World War II, a bunch of anthropologists and other social scientists made this their mission to make that kind of racial thinking, which is now called racial justice, not just scientifically provable, but morally part of our consciousness, that to make it the dominant morality. Right. And they succeeded. And I don't know exactly how, except that, of course, the war itself was its main driver because they had to justify the war. And the way to justify the war was to make the Nazis, and the Nazis were very helpful in this way because they actually were this, the ultimate racists. So they had to convince Americans that was bad or that it was worth fighting for. That's really what it was. Most Americans knew the Nazis were racists before the war started. The problem was they didn't want to go to war against the Nazis because of it. And so what happened was a very deliberate propaganda campaign begins in 1938, 1939, 1940, and they employ academics, many of them from Columbia, to get out the word that what is also American is the belief that we will not allow that kind of racial injustice to stand anywhere in the world, and that we will actually sacrifice our bodies to stop it anywhere in the world. And books were written. Gunnar Myrdal was a very important part of this. Ruth Benedict is who I'm studying now. Her book on racial equality and racism was distributed throughout Europe by the GIs. Once they invaded territory in Europe, they would hand out these books and they would teach it in the schools in occupied Germany later, which was that there are various races of people in the world. She allowed that. In fact, by the way, she created the category of Caucasian. Yeah, it's quite an amazing story. I didn't know this until recently. The Caucasian was invented by Ruth Benedict and other anthropologists working with her around Columbia University. Complete bizarre fiction if you step back and look at it, right? Because the Caucasus Mountains are in Russia, and Caucasians include people from wherever, somewhere west of Mongolia to Sweden down to now Spain and Australia and the United States. So, but anyway, she also said that we must treat all people as equals. So equality became the central value. So this explains, right, why distribution of bodies and colors is so fundamental to the way so many people think now. That becomes more important than who lives or who dies, or who's in a cage and who's not. Right. So anyway, it's an amazing shift, and in just the way that ordinary Americans think and feel, because it becomes a feeling because they internalize it. And I can't really, well, you kind of can prove it actually, because you see in polls how people think about race in the 1930s and then in the 1950s, and it's very different. But on top of that, you have this whole generation of people who literally sacrifice their bodies to do this mission, and they believe it. You can see a lot, not all, but a whole lot of these ordinary Americans are thinking, yeah, that Nazi racism is bad, or racism is bad, and we've got to go. We are willing to put our lives on the line to stop it. But
isn't a part of this though? It's complicated. I don't doubt that there were people who were making that argument, but it's also true that, you know, I was going to say memes, but they didn't look at it that way. The propaganda that involved Tojo and the subhuman Asian monkey race that they were fighting, who were willing to sacrifice themselves. And I was speaking on someone's behalf there, folks who are unfamiliar. I'm not not racist at all. I am in the sense that I hate all races. I think race is stupid.
The way they portrayed Japanese.
So there was, racism. The thing about it is, and you've talked about this before as well. I mean, race is all about otherizing and the various ways in which you can sustain like these obvious contradictions. The fact that you are fighting for equality and peace and for the equality of all men. But those people, like those entities, they're monsters. Like they can't be trusted, and firebombing them and dropping atomic bombs on them might be the only way to end this conflict appropriately. And this is not. I don't even want to get into an argument about the necessity of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Fat Man and Little Boy. I'm just saying, like, there is an otherizing that takes place in any large-scale national conflict, or in many of them, that makes it easier to kill the people on the other side.
So Ruth Benedict wrote this book, Race and Racism. She was the most famous anthropologist in the world then. She wrote it in 1940, and they started distributing it in 1941 in Europe. Guess what her book after that was? It was a book about Japan, and it was published in 1946, right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the United States was conquering and occupying Japan.
Yeah.
So she didn't like this anti-Japanese extreme racism, which you're right, was deployed even by the government.
Yeah.
That was kind of
Walt Disney.
That was like a necessary holdover, that racism, from the old scientific racism of the pre-war era, to motivate the troops to go fight and die in the Pacific Ocean for these chunks of rock that were meaningless otherwise to boys from Kansas.
Yeah.
So she didn't like that. And that was the final correction to make. And so in that book, she argues that the Japanese are not actually biologically determined to be aggressive people.
Right.
So we can actually treat them like us, and we'll just be fine from now on. But by 1946, 47, and you can sort of see it's one of the most remarkable changes in the way a group of people have thought about another group of people. How Americans think about the Japanese now, and even how they thought about them in the 1950s, is just an incredible radical shift from how they thought about them in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
I mean, only my father's generation, like it was the last, my dad every once in a while would talk about Japs. And this was a lefty in Berkeley, I mean, he tried to control himself, but that was the end of that. And that even became shamed. Right.
Sure.
So it's this obsession really with the distribution of punishment, of death, of whatever it is. Didn't you know this better than I do, but didn't Jonathan Haidt talk about this, like the progressive personality, meaning those who are attracted to progressive politics or liberal politics, right? That they would actually prefer, what was it? They would prefer, if the choice is between, they would prefer an overall immiseration of a population if if there's equal distribution of resources and wealth.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
I'm not nearly as familiar with that as some of my colleagues at Freethink, because for a while we've been trying to, I don't even know if I should be talking about, for a while we've been trying to work on a project with him, but he was just really busy. But a lot of us are familiar with his work, and I find it interesting. I think any sort of essentialist, like systematizing of stuff like that always makes me a little nervous. And I think ex post, from the outside, it becomes pretty easy to identify these tenets and values and define the system, and then say that this is how it works, and these are the precepts. The fact is, though, that the fundamental values, like, they shift, and people will abandon certain positions so long as their team is going along with it, and they'll start voting for other things, and they'll start ignoring those fundamental precepts because it's of no interest to them anymore. As you talk about, like, the shift in perspective with the Japanese, I think about the various ways in which groups of people can collectively shift their perspective on something almost on a dime, and be dead set against something that they had supported for so long beforehand. And I think about, like, Trump and Russia, and I think about Russia under under Barack Obama, and the Barack Obama Mitt Romney exchange, where the killer line that Barack used on Mitt Romney, who described Russia as the great enemy of the United States. Barack Obama says famously, Mitt, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back.
Right.
And you're like, ooh, sick burn. But now, I mean, could you imagine Donald Trump using that line to defend himself against accusations that he's done something with the Russians? And I suppose it's a little different because there's a specific allegation being made there. And obviously Donald Trump, everything about him is different. But yeah, just the way in which people change their perspectives is worth acknowledging. And it's, I suppose, for everyone, myself included, like, it is so important to be aware of the fact that you can do that, that you in your tribe, and we're all members of different tribes, can adhere to beliefs, mythology that can be deeply problematic.
So I didn't finish telling you about Ruth Benedict.
Oh, sorry about that. I want to know about Ruth Benedict. In fact, I'm eager to read your new book, Thad.
And so the other half of her argument, so one half was that we must treat people equally according to race, and we must distribute resources, et cetera, and justice equally among races. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
The other half of the argument was that it is our moral duty to defeat militarily those who are racists. I mean, that's the justification to send our boys across that ocean to fight and die in a war in a country they've never heard of, right? Because it is our mission as Americans, because this is what Americans do, to save those who are oppressed by those racists. So that, of course, became the dominant narrative about World War II, right? It was the war to save the Jews, even though if you look at the history at all, it had nothing to do with the Jews in the minds of the policymakers at the time. But anyway, that is, of course, right? If you were to ask any American on the street, pretty much, right? Even pretty well educated Americans, why we fought in World War II, they probably forget about the Japanese altogether. And they would say, well, it's to save the Jews.
Sure. I think a minority of them would even recognize or mention Pearl Harbor first.
Right. Yeah. So here's the thing. If you're really keen on having a lot of state power in places like the industrial heartland of Central Europe or the industrial heartland of Eastern Asia, you're going to need to have an enemy to go fight. And so it becomes essential to create the racist. Even though the Japanese and the Nazis were most certainly extremely racist.
Sure.
They were just very convenient, is my point, right? And so that is kind of an opportunity. They presented an opportunity for the Roosevelt administration, essentially, and a whole generation of progressives who wanted the United States to control through various mechanisms, which became like the IMF and GATT and the World Bank, those parts of the world, which they didn't really control until then. The Brits and the Japanese were controlling those parts of the world. Sorry, we need to take a quick break here. I will not do an ad for a product I don't use or don't like. When Mack Weldon asked to be a sponsor of the show, my producer Paul told me that 4 years ago, he replaced all his underwear with Mack Weldon underwear, and Paul is incapable of bullshitting. I had been wearing another brand of t-shirts and another brand of underwear for years, but that's over. Mack Weldon is just clearly better. It fits me perfectly and it's totally comfortable. In fact, I'll be wearing Mack Weldon t-shirts at the next Renegade University event. Their clothes are just designed better and are made with better fabrics than anything I've ever worn. They also have a line of silver underwear and shirts that are naturally antimicrobial, which means they eliminate odor. Also, it's very easy to shop on their website. It took me about 15 minutes to pick what I wanted, and the items were at my front door in 3 days. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but I'd be surprised if you didn't think that Mack Weldon is the most comfortable underwear, socks, shirts, undershirts, hoodies, and sweatpants that you will ever wear. But here is a guarantee. If you don't like your first pair of underwear, you can keep it and they will still refund you. No questions asked. So you can help this show and have a much better wardrobe if you go to mackweldon.com and get 20% off using promo code UTR. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was going to write a book at some point called The Uses of the Redneck. And this comes back to Ferguson. To me, all of that actually is the origin of what the politics around Ferguson became, which is that Democrats in particular need to create this evil, racist other to justify the expansion of their power over places and people And in particular, they want to, the way to expand their power over Black people specifically is to create these racists who Black people need to be saved from. When we have racist cops shooting people in the streets, then the government has to step in to correct it. And that's why Jamel Bowie blocked me, because what he wanted, and all of them wanted in that moment when there were the so-called riots in Ferguson, was for that. What they hated was that the government was too weak in Ferguson. That was their analysis of why they were using the tanks and the stupid tactics to quell that protest. Look back at that moment. They were calling for the National Guard. They were all calling for the use of federal power to come in and occupy Ferguson and establish justice in that city. So you have to have this all-powerful on the local level, purely evil force to justify the deployment of that kind of state power, weaponry, and ultimately death.
But I wonder about the ideology of race in particular versus a generalized other that you are crusading against, that you're pushing back against in any circumstance. Because at the end of the day, that's largely what it boils down to. I mean, the banksters are another sort of evil class that we can talk about that needs to be taken care of. We should eat the rich, perhaps, but we should certainly take their things, liquidate them, and we'll be better off. That is our adversary. The Soviets, and I mean, just the Russians actually, they invented the kulaks, an imaginary class of landholders who were particularly pernicious and who we should force to give us their things. And if they won't give them over peacefully, we will kill them. You have the right to manufacture an enemy, and you can do virtually anything to them. And politics is all about force. It's all about otherizing. It's all about finding a way to sort of strengthen your team and to disempower the other team so that you can accomplish some goal. So you can force people to do things that they would not otherwise do. At bottom, all political action works that way. The one concern that I have in the way that you're describing it, and I don't think it's your intention, I mean, I'm sure that you're aware of it, is the intentionality, the deliberateness of the sort of perspective that Jamel has when it comes to these various things. I mean, I think my general tendency is to believe people when they say certain things. If they say that their ultimate belief is that America is fundamentally racist and that they want to do something about racism, and the only way to fix this is to enact laws that protect people and give them the ability to sue racists wherever they find them, and to insist that university slots be allocated on the basis of demographic population. Ultimately, I suspect that's what they want. If the ultimate outcome there is some incoherent thing like empowering the government that you say is racist, I don't think it ever dawns on them. It's not dissimilar from this thing that we have experienced recently, where some Americans have been advocating forcefully for the government to take over the internet, to protect it and keep it free. The government that is today run by a guy named Donald Trump, who most of them don't like.
It's my favorite thing.
Steve Bannon.
We want Trump to have more power.
Steve Bannon similarly believes that Facebook and Google should be turned into utilities.
And did you see?
Again, so that the government can run this. You want Steve Bannon and Donald Trump to run Facebook and Google and to be responsible for keeping the internet free. Where does that work? Where does that happen?
And did you see a bunch of liberals on Twitter were like, in fact, it was Keith Ellison, of all people, said on Twitter, he said, gosh, I hate to admit it, but I agree with Steve Bannon on this.
Yeah.
And I was like, of course you do. You agree with him on that and a lot of other stuff too. You just don't know it.
Sure.
Okay. So this is why I hang out with you, because you force me to stay honest on these things. And you're right. The way I portrayed it sounds as if it was a grand conspiracy.
Yeah.
Let me think though. I think on race in this country, and liberals, I think it kind of was. I mean, open conspiracy. I do think the motivation, because I've heard them talk this way and I've seen them talk this way in their writing. So I don't mean just, among the people I've known. I mean, if you look at the writing of Benedict and Myrtle and all those, Eleanor Roosevelt and that whole generation of liberals, and if you look on college campuses at the people who are producing all of our ideas about race now, it's right there too, which is that we are positioned structurally and morally to take care of Black people. That's it. I mean, that's the way white liberals and progressives have talked. I'm not looking into their minds. I'm reading what they're writing, and that's what they're saying. I mean, maybe not in exactly those words, but actually quite often in those words. They need our help. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates' argument, most ironically.
Yeah.
Which is that Blacks have no agency. They are subject to wherever white supremacy is going to take them. That's where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And what did he famously say? There's nothing wrong with Black people that won't be cured by eliminating white supremacy, which is to say that white supremacy determines the destiny of Black people. So if they are helpless, then those with the power, white people, are the only ones who can save them. So it is a paternalistic relationship built in to the goddamn whole thing, baked into the cake from the beginning.
Paternalistic, and I mean, it's the belief that these people are children that need to be guided. Well, that's paternalism.
I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's about right. That's certainly the way he describes it. I mean, even when he talks about Between the World and Me, and in other writings, subsequent writings as well, there was that issue of The Atlantic that had a Black family portrayed on it in Baltimore, and when I read it, it was one of the most shocking things, the sort of naked representation of this family as completely unable to control their own impulses. The out of wedlock childbirths and engaging in violence and getting into fights and not knowing how to sort of having this pride that is easily wounded and that requires you to get into physical altercations because someone is looking at you in a strange way. Like, these are all things that were created by a history of discrimination and deprivation, and they can't help it. And they shouldn't be expected to. They certainly can't be held responsible for their actions because, historical circumstances created this for them.
Just to underscore the point. I mean, what we're saying here is that Ta-Nehisi Coates, of all people, his argument is basically allowing or encouraging racial paternalism by whites.
It is a form of racial paternalism. It's calling for it explicitly.
Now, does he know that? I don't know.
I think
he actually really is a smart guy.
He might not call it that. Well, I don't know him personally. I won't say much about that. I'm not a huge fan of the quality of his writing or his thinking. So it's hard for me to say he's a smart guy.
I didn't say he's James Baldwin.
I understand.
I just said he's certainly smart enough to get this.
If he was inclined to, maybe so.
If you or I sat him
talk
down
to him despite trying.
If you or I sat him down, that's the problem, and that he's the high priest.
He doesn't
racial justice now.
He doesn't have to interact with the plebes, and he's certainly not going to interact with any plebe that disagrees with him forcefully and might make that disagreement in public. Might offer it in public as opposed to in writing.
But you're also right that the evil othering has been extended to things other than racist.
Sure.
Yeah. Like, you're right.
In an American context, race is a uniquely powerful talisman.
Is it?
In an American context?
Uniquely? I've always said that, but just recently,
I think so.
Studying world history more than I used to,
I think
I've noticed that it's pretty common.
Yeah, there's no doubt that in the last 2-3 centuries, race has become a dominant construct around the world. But the truth of the matter is that people otherizing folks, creating, manufacturing these races. How many races are there? Right. The Hutus and the Tutsis are races.
I know, that's
right? But they're not.
According to them, they're separate races.
So we have a distinct version of it anyways. I'll say that much.
Kmele, it's just that they're wrong.
Yeah.
They're wrong about which race they belong to.
They need to understand that they're brothers.
We know that they're the same race.
Yeah, they're brothers.
The Negroid race. What Ruth Benedict called them. Isn't that a trip? The Caucasian race. That was invented right then, 1939, 1940. And it never occurred to me. I mean, it kind of occurred to me, but it was it is the weirdest invention ever. So what she did was she replaced.
So is that she invented the the phrase like Caucasoid? I mean, certainly there were concepts of white races before that, but she invented Caucasoid.
You do know, because you've read my book, that until then, the dominant idea about the races of Europe was that it was divided into three, right?
That's right.
The Alpines, the Nordics, and the Mediterraneans, right?
Mediterraneans who were pretty much almost black folk.
Sure. But brown, but because they were very close geographically to the Africans. But so what's going on right now in 1939 in World War II is that whole thing is being replaced by a new paradigm. So what they did was Benedict and her crew, and by the way, they were literally employed by the US government during the war to do propaganda on race in Europe and the United States. So the school curriculums were changed according to this. And by the end of the war, this was the way Americans thought. Here, no, it's not all these races, these three races in Europe and the blah, 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 that, that the scientific bad racists had. These ideas were discredited. And what they replaced it with was this new model, which we still have in this country, basically, which is that there are three races. That there were now there's the Caucasians, the Negroid race, and the Asiatic.
Well, is it Asiatic or Mongoloid? Because I know that's another
Asiatic.
Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid.
I'm pretty sure it got switched from Mongoloid to Asiatic. But the main point here
is nicer. I would prefer that if I
would rather be
Asiatic as opposed to Mongoloid.
Yeah, Mongoloid doesn't sound so good.
Yeah, it's not nice.
It has a bad ring to it.
Yeah.
But so that tripartite, Latinos weren't dealt with yet. I guess they got tacked on later. But that tripartite model, which is essentially how we think now about races, it's kind of a funny thing. Like those liberals at the time, they just replaced one crazy, completely illogical racial structure with another.
Yeah.
What the fuck is a Caucasian? What?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes no sense. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, but this paternalism thing, which, is like, drives me crazy. I'm assuming, I've always assumed this about you, but I'm not sure it's right. Let me ask you. I mean, I've always suspected, I should say, that might be close to or at the core of your anger about this stuff, because who you are, what you've done, your family history really contradicts on many levels this common notion that Black people are helpless, who need our saving. Because you talked about the Jamaicans and the immigrant thing, and the Blacks are lazy and we have 5 jobs and we make our own history. We are not helpless. We do have agency, right? It sucks, this life, but we still do it. And Blacks seem to think that they're helpless. They act like they're helpless, I think is kind of what you were saying, is the problem that many Jamaican immigrants have. But then your story, this is the other story we didn't finish last time. A lot of people don't know this. It's pretty amazing, regardless of one's color.
So you say?
Oh, come on. So we talked about your childhood. We didn't talk about what happened in college. So you went to the University of Maryland at College Park, right?
Yeah.
And then you were, at that point, am I right? You were basically a good liberal Democrat, and you were even going to be a
standard issue Democrat. I had not thought
maybe?
very deeply about politics. I was interested in public policy. I went to school for biochem. And was pursuing that. And in high school, I was in a magnet program. So I was doing biochemistry stuff for the last 2 years of high school, which was actually a lot of fun. I'm still interested in those things. I've worked at NIH for a year doing polypeptide synthesis and stuff. Yeah. I used to run the electrogel and screw around with the pipettes and stuff. It was fun. But I discovered C-SPAN in the first winter break of my freshman year of college when I went home, and I just could not stop watching this stuff. And I'd always been interested in public policy. And the next semester I changed my major, and my mom was just furious. She was beside herself about this. Her son is supposed to be a doctor. And I was sure that I would run for Congress. And
you would be a fantastic doctor, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. I'd be really good at it. Yeah, no, and I would get into med school with relatively low grades. Even if I had relatively low grades. No, it's just true. But yeah, I actually ended up taking a weird detour and started a telecom consulting business in my second year of undergrad. And I ran that for a little over 12 years. I mean, it's still around, but I mean, it's essentially somewhat mostly dormant. You like manage some existing client relationships.
What was the business?
It was we did like internet service brokering. So for a long time in the olden days, there were people who would broker like internet services. There were these things called T1s, which people may not quite remember. And it was sort of the foundational unit of delivering internet service to various businesses of all sizes. And we used to help people price those across the different carriers and service providers. It was something that wasn't super difficult to do. I mean, just from a technical standpoint, for a customer that was interested in this, it functioned a lot like Orbitz or Travelocity. Orbitz is not a thing anymore, or Kayak is the current thing. But that's effectively what we did. We just did like brokering of internet services, and we started with DSL, and then we moved up to T1s, and then we were helping financial companies and healthcare providers put these MPLS like private networks together, and transitioning them from frame relays. And it was good. I mean, it was the sort of thing where I was able to do this job while still going to school, taking 1-2 classes at a time for, I think, like 6 or 7 years until they sent me a diploma that I never opened. Still in my house. I looked inside of it the other day, and yeah, it's like mine. It has a University of Maryland emblem in it, but I didn't even take it out of the roll. But yeah, I mean, I did that for a while. And I don't know. I don't know what else is interesting about that story, except from I created a gig for myself.
You're not telling the whole story is why it's not interesting. So it became quite successful. You don't have to be specific about how successful, but
relatively successful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, what fucking 19-year-old does that?
19
when they're
20.
in college?
Yeah.
I mean,
some.
Or any 19-year-old. No.
Yeah.
Who? Name one.
Like Bill Gates,
No.
Mark Zuckerberg started a business.
No, it was nothing
Not
when he was 19. Took him a while.
No. But my business wasn't nearly as successful as his. Which is the real problem.
You were making pretty serious bank before Mark Zuckerberg.
This is
was
true. Yeah,
in age.
this is true. No,
Yeah.
At a very young age, I was doing quite well.
And
yeah,
when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook,
Uh-huh.
what did he do vis-a-vis Harvard? He left.
Yeah,
he dropped out. You didn't. You finished.
No, I didn't. I don't understand. I kept going.
I just do not understand a human being doing that.
I had a lot of time in, and I was enjoying the coursework at that point. What's really interesting is the time that I left university, and I was still going. So you're getting forced to do certain stuff. Is when I got really interested, like really interested in like libertarian politics, and started self-radicalizing and doing a bunch of like weird reading on my own. So I would pick up books and read them. And it just so happened that, I get to pick my courses at this point. So I'm going to take a course. Well, I'll take this weird course on the WTO and global trade, because I've just finished reading The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and I thought that was super interesting, and I want to learn some more about this. And like that is what I did, effectively pick courses that complemented my weird heretical reading. So yeah, I mean, and I'm sure I sketched out sort of the intellectual course that I took from Friedman to Rothbard and Mises and Hayek. Which just
who
pick those
does
things
this?
on my own.
Yeah, so you're 19 years old. You established this very successful company, entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know this. You were selling stuff or doing stuff, consulting with these major corporations.
I mean, small to
You're
mid-sized
basically
businesses.
teenagers. There's two of you, right?
Yeah.
You and your partner.
Well, they didn't have to see us. This is the beauty of the internet.
I know.
It's all by phone.
I know. It's just still that's what's amazing, man.
Yeah.
It's totally amazing. That alone, and then on top of that, you're having like this major intellectual shift and like reading all these crazy books that you certainly are not supposed to be reading.
No,
and you're changing.
definitely not.
I mean, that's a lot of work to like change from liberal Democrat to libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just a lot of work right there.
I mean, it was
so
school.
you've always done this work. Well, this extreme work thing apparently, because you had to be working all the time then.
Yeah, no, it was a lot. It was a lot of work, but I wasn't married. For a while, me and my business partner like lived together. Like I was living in his house.
Yeah, you had to.
Yeah. So yeah, we worked
So
all the time.
You weren't with Tracy?
We were dating, but we were kids.
Yeah.
She was in school. I mean, after she finished her degree, she went to New York for about 1.5 years to go work for Teach for America or something like that. My wife wanted to be a social worker. You imagine?
Man. Oh boy.
Goofy anarcho-capitalist Kmele with the social worker wife. Yeah, that didn't happen. She ended up starting a business, which is great, which she sold.
So she
fairly
left all those
recently.
people unsaved. Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, if only she had gotten down to work, yeah, she would have fixed all of the things.
So, I mean, I always assumed that had something to do. You have some anger about this, both treatment of Black people, but I guess anybody really, as children, and I think what really pisses you off is Black people in particular accepting or even encouraging that identity for themselves.
I suppose I definitely find it annoying. I don't know that there's any sort of personal animus towards the idea. The truth is, I genuinely care about this stuff. I don't know if I told you this. I'm sure I didn't actually. I went to see a film that a friend is producing. Crown Heights is the name of the film. It's about a Trinidadian immigrant who lives in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, although the movie never really says that, which is weird. And he ends up, I'm not spoiling too much, but he ends up going to prison. So based on a true story, he goes to prison for 20 plus years for a crime he did not commit. And he is one of two people that go to prison, and you are sort of following this odyssey with the man. He's eventually let out. Again, I'm not spoiling the film. This is a true story, and you kind of know the facts of this already. You should still watch the movie. I'm not going to rate it and give you my Rotten Tomatoes rating, but it's not my favorite movie I've seen all year. But this was an early premiere of the film, and it turns out there's a panel afterwards, which I wasn't really aware of, and it's the guy who had been in prison for 20 odd years, like sitting on stage with three activists who work in the sort of social justice, criminal justice reform space. And they're having a conversation on stage with this guy. And the conversation is narrowly about this issue as a racial issue. Mind you, he goes to prison for the murder of a Black kid. Two Black people are put in prison for it, one of whom actually did the crime. He was placed at the scene by a witness, and the witness was essentially forced to testify against him. Not forced to testify like you do it or we'll shoot you, but like the police wanted to get their man. And in order to do it, they twisted some arms to get testimony out of him that was incriminating. And they did their best to keep him in prison once they had him locked up because they wanted to maintain the collar. I told you that story, and it doesn't matter what race this person is, right? Like, this is a thing that not just can happen to a white person, it has happened to a white person.
Probably as
and it happens all the time. There are lots of people locked up for unjust reasons. And something that I've talked to you about recently, and I've talked about on the other podcast, The Fifth Column, and in other places, like forensic science is a total mess. President Obama, just before he left office, had a commission that looked at this and that issued a report, the PCAST report. People should go find it and read it. It's highly readable, and it will shock you. But maybe you should look at the Radley Balco piece on this that he wrote in January of 2017. So this year, about the time that Barack Obama would not fight for science. And it's about this. And Barack Obama had this commission. He understood that forensic science was broken in a fundamental way, that a lot of the comparative analysis techniques that we believe in, that we think are real things, like bite mark analysis, fingerprint analysis even, that a lot of these things are highly subjective, and that we cannot say much about the quality of the outcomes, and that routinely law enforcement agents, from the level of the FBI to sort of your local police department, the experts that have come in to testify have overstated the reliability of these things. And this is even true of DNA analysis early on, although DNA is sort of the bright shining star of forensic science. It is today on much firmer footing because it is actually a science.
Because that's
it's different.
Only good news in criminal justice recently.
Exactly. Yeah. DNA has come out of the scientific world, but before it happened, before that was the case, it was a mess too. And it actually had to go through this. There's a whole interesting narrative there that people ought to be more aware of. And I'm working on some projects related to that. But in any other case, I won't explain all of that. I only set that up to say it's a mess. It's broken. Barack Obama has a commission that issues a report that says as much, and that issues a great many reforms that ought to have been enacted. And Loretta Lynch, Barack Obama's attorney general, decides to do absolutely nothing. In fact, she says thanks, but no thanks, and just says, no, we're not going to pursue these reforms. Mind you, some of these reforms were like endorsed by FBI reports, investigations into themselves after miserable, embarrassing debacles and scandals. And subsequently, of course, the Trump administration isn't interested in fixing these things either. Jeff Sessions, not only did they decide not to do anything under the Obama administration, Jeff Sessions that commission is no longer in existence. He is appointing a czar of forensic science. Mm-hmm. And it is clear that what that czar will do is defend the status quo, i.e., maintaining these practices of dubious reliability, in some cases of dubious provenance altogether. Things like ballistic casings matching, which was done for a very long time, where they would melt bullets down and test the alloys and say, oh, well, we can track that to a particular package, only it's not a thing. Never a thing. There was no science to back up the claims of this ballistic bullet analysis, the alloy analysis. So they didn't do anything about that. And I stood up in the Crown Heights screening to point out that when they asked for questions, I was a little reluctant to do it, but I was frustrated. And I stood up and I said, we're having this conversation, and I keep hearing people talk about this in terms of racial justice. And the truth is that I think that's pretty obtuse. And it's the sort of thing that makes it easy to believe that this is just about Black people. And it makes it easy to ignore the fact that the Obama administration did nothing about this issue when they had an opportunity to. And I care about these issues deeply. And I wish that we would talk about practical reforms that we can pursue, rather than just talking in the abstract about the racism of the system, which someone had just said on stage. The real problem with the criminal justice system is that it's fundamentally racist, and what we need is prosecutors who care. And I thought to myself after, I went back to my seat, and of course he said, I'm going to have to forcefully disagree with you, and went on to restate that and say what we need is prosecutors who care. And in my seat, dead center, third row back from the stage, I'm thinking to myself, well, what does that mean? Magic? How do you do that? How do you ensure that the bureaucrat that gets hired to do this job is someone who gives a shit about this particular person and isn't racist? And how do you know that it's racism and not just incompetence or institutional inertia?
You just keep preaching and shaming.
Yeah. But that's all that matters.
Because that will never be won. That fight will never be won, but it is our duty as Americans and Christians, apparently, to just keep shouting at the devil.
Well, what's wonderful is I got a spattering of applause and a lot of gasps.
I'm sure. And
he got violent applause when he said, no, of course, the system is racist as hell.
Okay.
Violent applause.
Okay. So what you're saying, Kmele, is that the Obama administration, including Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, who is an African-American woman.
So I've heard.
Yes. Knew that very bad science was being used to put people in prison. Okay. And that they knew this and ignored it and refused to act on it.
Yes. And their claim is that they have instituted reforms to correct these things. It is not a believable claim, is the bottom line. Yeah. And secondarily, the fact is that there are new dubious sciences being introduced and invented every day, like smell analysis.
What if they received a report that very bad science was being used to disproportionately put African Americans in prison?
I mean, this is true. That's true of the forensic analysis.
No, I was going to say, no, the science, I think they ignored it because it doesn't have any effect. If they did institute those reforms and change that science, I mean, it wouldn't have any effect on the distribution of races.
Well, it probably would, because Black people they're more likely to be arrested in general. They're more likely to be arrested.
Distribution would say the same, right?
Percentage-wise, well, maybe not. I'm saying that well, here's the thing, and this is why sort of distributions are interesting to look at. If Black people are more likely to be arrested and they're disproportionately poor, so they're less likely to have high quality defense attorneys, they're a hell of a lot more likely to take the plea. They're a hell of a lot more likely to end up in prison as a result of these interactions. And if there's bogus science being used that strengthens the case of the prosecution, the weight of a dysfunction like this in the system is likely to fall on them disproportionately.
But am I right that it would probably reduce it? The reason that prosecutors like it is it gives them more power.
Yes.
And the reason that the state, I guess, theoretically would like it if the state is such a thing, you know, is that it gives it more power, right?
Sure.
So reforming it reduces the power of the state. And
this is the principal reason why Loretta didn't do it.
The idea is that
the
fewer people overall.
Right. They would have a tougher job sending people to jail.
Okay, but the thing is, it doesn't affect the distribution, though, of races, does it? I don't think so. I mean, it would be the same distribution, just fewer of everyone.
It would be fewer of everyone, but if there's fewer of everyone, there's going to be fewer Black people in particular. And Black people are losing more of those cases.
But the percentages wouldn't change, would they?
I think if Black people are more likely to go to jail, and if the prosecution's hand is weakened, the question is it going to be weakened more instead of Black cases as opposed to white cases? I mean, especially if you're talking about people who are going to jail, like in situations where they ought not to have gone to jail, where they're taking pleas, where they ought not to have had pleas. Like, if this is something that is more likely to aid someone who is lower income and finds themselves in the criminal justice system, and if that person is more likely to be Black, it's entirely possible that it would be of more advantage to Black people. But they didn't cast this issue in that particular way. And that's what I'm saying, like the intentionality, the deliberateness of sort of pursuing policy reforms along racial lines, and of making sort of create and invent new policy reforms along racial lines that you can use as bludgeons. I don't know that that's something that they really do. In this particular case, I mean, this is something that prosecutors want. It's something that law enforcement agencies want. And Loretta Lynch and Jeff Sessions, while they are of different political persuasions and may have certain issues they agree about, the truth is that the only race that really matters in some contexts is blue. And there they defend their institution and they defend their ability to put people in jail. And let's not look, I don't want to overstate the case. Like, certain disciplines of forensic science, like fingerprinting, like more often than not, they're probably getting like a match that's sensible. It is likely that most of the people that have been sent to prison are actually guilty of the crime for which they've been convicted, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I can't tell you what percentage of people are not. I can't tell you what the error rates are for any given crime lab. And it's worth noting that the people who work in crime labs are generally not scientists. And the crime labs are owned by the police departments.
Oh, God.
And in many cases, the crime labs get an incentive from the police departments for cases that are won and closed.
Oh, my
so
God.
When they testify on behalf of the state, it is effectively a crime lab who cares about the outcome of this case and is not in favor of or interested in the defense. And worse yet, when you appeal, and if you have a state-appointed defense attorney, your state-appointed defense attorney must get permission from the state in order to spend money for their own forensic analysis, for their own testing. And they sure as hell need to be able to do it on appeal. So there are cases where someone is appealing something where they've been convicted, where they want to have DNA samples run again, and they can't do it. They can't do it. So, yeah, there's a bit of a rabbit hole.
One of the worst forms of crony capitalism there could be, right? I mean, right? You're talking about essentially sort of capitalist businesses.
In some cases, I mean, these crime labs, these crime labs are government entities. God. Yeah. This is the thing about forensic science. Like, most of those disciplines were invented by police.
I mean, it's just the equivalent
for police.
It's just the equivalent of giving the cops more bullets, right? I
mean, no, it's a different sort of power. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Created by cops for cops.
Yeah. I still think. Well, I mean, I think there's two reasons. Again, you don't actually know the motivation of Loretta Lynch. You don't know that it's because she wants the prosecutors to have more power. However, she is a prosecutor.
She's a prosecutor, and the associations were appealing to all of these same things, and she made the same arguments that they did.
I believe she was a career prosecutor, right? I mean, that's always.
I don't know, actually.
Or for a long time.
Pedigree.
I'm pretty sure she's been a.
But I mean, at the Justice Department, like, that is her job. She's the chief prosecutor of the United States.
Yeah,
like, it's her job to do this.
But she also had, she was very tough on crime. And, so it would make sense. But I still think, I mean, that it's not really necessarily going to reduce the so-called racial injustice in criminal justice. I just don't see that. To me, it's just an overall. It would be an overall reduction of state power.
Maybe I could see how it would, but it's possible. But I mean, it's a matter of implementation. The bottom line is you could certainly make this argument and say that it disproportionately helps Black people. In fact, that is precisely what Radley Balco does in his article, which when I talk to him tomorrow, I'm going to raise the issue with him and push back a little bit on the tendency to frame things in that way.
Okay. So your anger has nothing to do with the fact that you're so successful and independent and need no one's help. If I'm angry
and if it comes across, oftentimes it's probably because of like the personal nature of the response that I get oftentimes. Like the response I get is like, you are an Uncle Tom, you're a house nigger, you're all of these awful things for holding these heretical views. And I don't have a particular affection for Black people. I don't care about Black issues. I don't. I care about people as humans. And that is my interest in them. I don't have any tribal loyalty to Black folk. I don't see a young Black man and think I need to help my brother. I don't feel that way. I'm sorry. I do care as a human. Like when I see people in desperate situations, and in my new neighborhood, I see people in desperate situations on a pretty routine basis. A lot of them are Black, and like my heart goes out to those kids. Like I have sympathy for large groups of like young Black men who are like not marauding the streets, but who engage in overtly antisocial behavior, making a scene, like screaming profanities, not because they want to be renegades who are breaking new ground, but because their perspective is, if you want a nigga, I'm gonna show you a nigga. And like I'm concerned for them because I know that this can only take you so far in life. There are certain spaces where you can't thrive with that sort of mentality,
unless they have flow.
Yes, unless they've got flow or a crazy jump shot. But even that jump shot, your chances of making it with that jump shot are lower if you can't be a little sophisticated.
You know, I'm a nigga attitude does really work in hip hop. But anyway,
yeah, in hip hop,
the only place.
No, that was agreed. Yeah, but the odds of making it are very, very low. Lower than for a basketball player.
So
the likelihood of making a bunch of money doing it are increasingly slim because of the way that the industry's changed.
Yeah. So a lot of us are marveling at the fact that you are moving or have moved already to Bedford-Stuyvesant.
Live from Bedford-Stuyvesant. Yeah.
Interesting choice. I mean, was that, why? Because you don't like Black people. We just established that.
I don't like any race.
What a funny choice for Kmele Foster.
I have issues with Black culture. This is true. But Bed-Stuy is affordable, relatively speaking. It's New York City and things are crazy. Bed-Stuy has beautiful brownstones that one can still obtain for something less than $2 million. And my wife kind of liked the neighborhood, and we are getting ready to have a kid, which I think I can say at this point, because this won't be released tomorrow. And I needed some more space. Like my 2-bedroom place was not quite large enough, so I could afford a place in Bed-Stuy. So we're going to be renting there for the next 2 years, and it's different. You know, it's still an emerging, changing neighborhood. There is still like crime that happens near enough that it's of great concern. And it's the sort of situation where I want to be the one who walks the dog late at night, because I would prefer it be me and not my pregnant wife, because I don't know this place. And there are some sketchy things. And there's, several projects within walking distance, within a 2-3 block distance, because it's Bed-Stuy and it's that way.
You're kind of soft pedaling your reaction to Bed-Stuy. I mean,
I'm probably a lot more relaxed about it now because I've lived there.
Okay.
It's my neighborhood now. When I first moved there, it was June 15th. So July 4th was coming in every single night. There were fireworks, and one had to wonder, is that a firework or a gunshot? And I really did not know the neighborhood.
I'm pretty sure I got a text from you not long ago saying, I don't know if I'm going to make it.
you might have.
I know I did. I can show it to you.
I believe it.
And it just seemed like you were increasingly sort of depressed and frustrated by that neighborhood.
The space we're in is not great either, and it's just different. Like Tribeca, I lived in like right on the border of Tribeca in the financial district, and late at night when I walk my dog, I am the most intimidating person like within 2 miles, and Like, it's great. Like, I've never have to worry. My wife is coming home at 2:00 in the morning. It's fine. I've had conversations about, well, what shoes am I wearing tonight when I walk back from the train station to my apartment?
Right.
Because, you know, we like a lot of the same things. And if you wanted to buy these Yeezys, that would cost you $1,000. So taking them from me is...
I just got very nervous for you.
You were looking at the shoes I'm wearing tonight and getting nervous for me?
No, I'm just thinking that. I didn't even think about that. But you're really a target.
Yeah. And look, the truth of the matter is, like, and this is the thing, and this is actually I sent you an article today about like Heather McDonald and like just sort of the culture. And here is where I start to sound conservative to people, because I talk about the dysfunction within sort of Black culture, the dysfunction that one sees in certain impoverished communities, where, you know, a lot of sort of crime and violence happens, and where there's seeming sort of pathology, a cycle, in which certain values are inculcated and reinforced. I've definitely had situations where I walk down the street and there's a group of kids that are coming towards me, or guys about my age anyways, and they are sizing me up. And there's a question as to whether or not, like, the interaction here should be, hey, what's up, y'all? Or don't say anything, because this might be a situation you have to deal with in some way. No one has ever tried anything with me. There've been at least one situation where someone like started to do something weird, like close to my wife. It could happen in Midtown. It could happen in downtown Manhattan. The probability of it happening in Bed-Stuy is certainly higher. So that's something that makes me a little nervous, and perhaps more nervous than most of the gentrifiers that move into the neighborhood, because I've got a different relationship to the people who are native to the area.
Yeah, you're sort of a threat to them on a deeper level than the typical white yuppie, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the truth is that they probably don't even know who I am.
But
right? Like, and if you don't know who I am, and I'm not like, you know, the chick in yoga pants who clearly like must live over there with those folks, I might be prey. I don't know.
Yes, I'm saying.
But most crime, like most violent crime anyways, isn't random. You know, it's people you know. So maybe it's not an issue. And like I said, right now, you know, I won't go home the way I came here. Like, I'm not going to walk the particular blocks and streets I took and take the particular train I took. I'll take the Uber all the way back right to the front door. And I'll change shoes before I walk the dog.
Yeah. You got to go,
because these are hard to get.
You got to go back to that old corporate look we talked about last time.
Yeah,
that's right. The last time we talked, you weren't even thinking about Bed-Stuy.
I don't really do that a lot.
And we were just celebrating how you are a hip hop
guy
I
don't do that either.
And now it's like,
even my hip hop is different.
Now I'm about to tell you I'm about to change my course.
Be more conservative.
Yeah, you need and then they'll leave you alone.
No, probably not. Probably not. The suits haven't been broken out in a while. It has to be a real formal occasion for me to do that.
You know that your life is about to radically change, right?
Because of the baby?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm excited about it though. It is the one thing in my life, and I probably said this to you before, because it's so amazing to me. The one thing in my life that I do and that I think about that does not ever like give me any sort of anxiety or stress is this kid, like this person that is coming, who I am extremely excited to meet and over the moon about, like, knowing that they're there, and like eager to see what incredible and remarkable things she does. I hope that she's into the things that I am so we can do them together. But at this point, I don't really care. Yeah. I just want her to be remarkable, and I want to help her be remarkable at whatever she wants. So I'm very excited about that.
So I'll give you a warning and a promise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
A negative and a positive.
Okay.
The warning is that I sounded roughly like you did. And intellectually, I was correct about how much it would change my life and about how much work it would be. Yeah. But emotionally, I didn't get it. Yeah. And you can't get it until it happens. So I know you get this. I'm sure people tell you this all the time, and it's annoying. But well, the interesting thing, I guess, intellectually about this is that what's really on the line, what's really going to change, and this touches on your politics and who you are fundamentally, I think, is that what's really on the line is your freedom. Your freedom is going to change a lot.
I see that.
Yeah. I mean, I've just been I hesitate to say this, but it's just true. Of course, a lot less free over the
Sure.
last 15 years. I mean, that's just the way it is. And
Sure.
it's really hard for,
Yeah.
especially for some of us who value freedom and our own personal freedom.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, man.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
No, I
don't know.
have a dog, right? I can send the dog to the border
I
for a
know.
month and I don't have to feel any sort of way about it. In fact, he loves going to boarding with this lady on a farm.
Yeah. I mean, you go your own way. And
Yeah.
you go your own way hard all day and all night, really.
It's true.
And you have for a long, long time. So I don't know what else to say to you.
I know.
But-
And I haven't come to terms with it. I do know that I expect to get a nanny. Maybe I need two.
Highly recommended.
Yeah.
You're going to get a West Indian nanny? You kind of have
That's
to.
a little weird.
They're the only ones in
Yeah,
Brooklyn, pretty much.
It feels weird, though.
In my neighborhood in Park Slope,
Yeah.
it was all white people with West Indian nannies.
Yeah, no, they're still all over the place.
Oh, it's amazing.
There's fewer of them in Bed-Stuy.
It's a hell of a subculture too. Those
Yeah.
nannies.
Oh, I'm aware.
well,
actually.
the nanny culture. You don't know about them.
I mean, my family's Jamaican. I have West Indian aunties who are nannies and cousins who are older than me who run. One of them runs a nanny business.
It's really
my mom. Her first job in America, nanny
Yeah.
to a family who had two blonde children. Braxton was the name of the little boy, and I would occasionally go and play with Braxton at his house. So yeah, that was her first job in this country.
I like that name. I've always loved Jamaican names, but
Which Braxton?
Yeah,
Braxton is not the Jamaican kid. Braxton is the kid.
Oh, he's the white.
Yeah,
he's a white kid. Oh,
yeah.
but
Silver Spoon,
it is kind of
Silver Spoon Braxton, who lived in a single family
it is a
estate
Jamaican
in
kind of name,
Rock Creek Park. Yeah,
the Englishness of it. But anyway, so that's the negative part. I don't know what else to tell you. Here's the good news. I mean, well, I can't say that this will happen to you in exactly these proportions, but at the time, I remember telling people that how hard I was working and how much I was suffering and how little freedom I had. But I said after I think a month that after Toby was born, that like 7 of the top 10 experiences of my life happened in the last 30 days since he was born. Wow. And that's still true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just like a magical moment after a magic. I mean, it's really true.
Yeah.
Magical moment after a magical moment.
What is it? Is it, I've talked to one of my colleagues at Freethink, Chandler, about this before. And he has talked about like how he will watch his children, like just become humans, become aware of their surroundings, discover new things, and become these autonomous entities with personalities. In fact, like I've seen each of his kids like not at the various points at which, but just different intervals. And every single time it's like astonishing, like how they've gone from blob to like seemingly aware, holding their head up straight, to like shooting you a smile because you did something, to walking and taking an interest in something and being disinterested in something
I mean,
else.
I'm like one of America's leading critics of the family and parenting, but that is all it's cracked up to be, that part of it, especially those months and pretty much the whole first year. I mean, it's the hardest physical thing I've ever done in my life. But yeah, no, it is incredible. And oh man. Yeah. And it's like, it's every hour. You see them grow every hour at that age. You will love that. It'll be phenomenal for you. I wonder though, here's the other thing though. Oh, this is good. This is interesting. The other dilemma that presents people like you and me when we have a child is this power relationship, this thing where they didn't, and this is what Toby's been pulling on me lately, but he's right. Like, I don't have any argument with him on this. He's like, I didn't ask to be here. I didn't put myself into this world. You did that. So why are you asking me to do the dishes? Why are you asking me to take out the garbage? Why are you telling me what moral obligation? This is the thing. It's the moral obligation.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because that's how we speak to them. Well, you need to, you should, do this or that because we know it's the right thing to do. Well, no, fuck you. It's like, I had nothing to do with this. He says this to me and I don't have any argument in response except, well, Tobes, you're right. You had no choice in this, but here we are. That's done. And there's no way to change that. Yeah. So now we just have to decide how to live together and what's the best way to live together going forward. And, sometimes he says, because he's now 15 and you'll get there eventually. I know it's impossible to believe when you have a baby, but they do actually get there. I know it's just, they're totally different people, but he has said recently, well, yeah, I'll just live by myself. It's like, okay.
When? Eventually?
No, right now. Yeah.
Oh,
right
okay.
now. I mean, he doesn't really mean it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's, I guess my point is that it's this constant struggle of you're incarcerating this person. You are. You're going to be, man.
No, I mean, the word that came to mind as you were talking about all of that is warden. Like that is the word that I was thinking. So sure, I'm fine with that.
So you're going to lose a lot of your freedom.
Yeah.
And you're going to be,
in order to deal with the prisoner,
restricting severely the freedom of your,
I'm fine
can
with
I
that.
say the sex? Did you say the sex?
Yeah.
Your daughter.
I said she at least.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I get that. I'm fine with that. In fact, there are plenty of freedoms I don't want her to have. Yeah, I like don't want any boys like touching her, violating her, having sexual relations with her. No intimacy.
Like when she's
perhaps
30?
Never. I mean, I could imagine her going into a nunnery or convent. It all sounds like sort of violating my daughter. Worse if it's a man.
Shit. Now we have to do a third episode.
This is a whole nother thing
to deal with this.
I don't want to talk about this. She's Dad, when she gets here, like there's nothing sort of sexual about her. I don't even want to think about the possibility that she will grow into a beautiful woman who looks like her mom. Like that is like, holy crap.
By the way, man, talk about some genetic advantages.
Yeah.
This one's going to have.
Yeah, oof. I hope so. I want her to look like my wife though. I want her to be the spitting image of my wife. Because I don't know that I would make a very beautiful woman. But my wife is quite good. I'm very pleased. So yeah,
okay. I'm glad you've worked that out in advance. I guess I don't have to help you with that one. I mean, I think you're gonna, whatever. That's way down the line.
It will have its challenges. Yeah. I'm sure. I know that I'll have to be the warden, and I have already.
That's way down the line.
Like decided, like that the. The traditional West Indian way in which I was raised with switches and pot spoons and stuff, and not a thing. Don't believe in hitting small people. And I hope I can adhere to that conviction. Do now.
Huh. Yeah. And in fact, I was in New York before Toby was born and then after Toby was born for the first 7 years of his life. And, you'd see the Black or Latina women on the subway smacking the shit out of their kids, and everybody was sort of like, oh God, it's so terrible. And I guess I was more or less in that camp of thinking it was terrible, but pretty much by about the time he was 4 or 5, I was like, you go, girl.
Well, I know.
Hit him again.
Yeah.
Because I actually, whatever. It's a longer conversation, but I think we need to rethink that.
Well,
corporal punishment.
I'm willing to revisit it. I will say this. I think there's a simplistic narrative about like poverty and violence against children and like the culture of poverty, like having that be a part of it. And I'm not referring to sort of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan thing when I say that. I'm just sort of talking in the abstract, because West Indian families, which have kids that have great outcomes, do that same thing. Sure. I got spanked. And the truth is that for me, like, as I have thought about my own like childhood and upbringing, like that is what like makes me concerned about it. Yeah. And I
never even thought about that.
And my own, relationship with my mom is not like bad or anything. I wouldn't say that she abused me or anything like that. But I certainly think that it is not something that I am interested in having sort of as a part of my relationship with my kid. And you mentioned it, in Bed-Stuy, like every single day almost, I see examples of sort of the most inspiring and interesting parenting and some of the most like just terrifying and sad parenting, like every single day. And it's not just like a spanking. Most times it's not a hit at all. It's a stupid. Fuck's wrong with you?
Oh yeah.
Shut up. He's 2. That's what's wrong with him. He's 2.
I'm not talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Spanking them.
I'm sure. But I'm saying that that's all like,
right.
It's a part of it. And the slippery slope, what is the word I'm looking for here? It's probably just second hour fatigue that's happening here now. The disproportionate power between sort of father here, 180 odd pounds when he's in good shape, and you, small person. I shouldn't hit you. Like that shouldn't be the way that I negotiate with you. Like, I can't beat you like intellectually. Like, I have to hit you. This seems like the wrong lesson. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm not a parent. I don't know anything about these things.
Yeah.
And I'm not even making an assertion about anyone else's parenting here. I'm just talking
I don't
about
even
mine.
want to talk anymore because I just want you to enjoy it for as long as you can. I really mean that.
I'll call you for advice. It's
I
fine.
hated it when people would do this to me.
It's
before
I'm
he was
not-
born.
I'm not upset.
I really mean this. I mean, you are going to love certainly
Good.
the experience for quite a while.
Yeah.
So we'll talk later.
Good.
About
I love it
when it
now.
becomes really a problem and a question about freedom for people and being a warden and all that. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get there. Episode, whatever that'll be. Well, I don't know. Good enough for now.
Sure.
We did it
Of course.
for now.
We made it.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. If you want to become a supporting member of the Unregistered community, please go to unregisteredunderground.com. For information on the upcoming Ask Me Anything live webinar on October 4th, go to thaddeusrussell.com/AMA. And to find out more about the special weekend with me in Los Angeles from November 10th to the 12th, go to thaddeusrussell.com/Los Angeles. Thanks for listening.